Hi guys, so I've had heaps of questions about how I do my colouring with the colour pencils, and mostly they're about how I get the full colours and just getting them to blend. So quickly on materials, I'm using Caran d'Ache Luminance pencils, which are awesome. They are a wax-based pencil and I use them mostly for bases and blending, and they work really well using them with the Faber-Castell Polychromos, which are oil-based and have a harder lead. So my first step when I get to a section is always to take the Luminance pencils, which are, as I said, the wax-based, and this one is Payne's Grey 30%, because I want a blue base for what may look like a black section on the bird, but it really isn't. It's all blues and colour. There's never really black anywhere, which is funny because the black pencils in your sets, they are blue based, so you'll find if you lay down some black pencil and you go over it with white, especially a white aquarelle pencil, which are your best pencils for going and using white in colour pencil work because they're so thick. So if you lay white over a black pencil, you'll find that the white actually tints blue, and that's because the black pencils have a blue base. They're not black because black doesn't really exist. It's sort of just something we tell ourselves. So basically I'm sort of just filling the paper at the moment. I'm trying to get the nice uneven edge that he has on his breast, and just filling the area, because when I go back over with the other pencils, this base is going to influence every colour that I lay down. So it's going to help the others grab, and it's going to change the tones and colours that I also put down as I go further along. So that's Payne's Grey 30%, and I've laid it down so that it sort of fills the paper. I don't want to go heavy, I've gone quite light, but the way that I've done it, it's sort of with a sharp tip, and it fills in sort of the grain of the paper. And now this is Payne's Grey, no percentage, it's just a straight Payne's Grey Luminance pencil. And I'm sort of just working up to what will be the darker tones, because if you don't get plenty of colour in there before you go too dark, you're going to end up with a really flat looking drawing. There won't be any depth to it, there's only going to be a couple of colours in there. So again, I'm going quite lightly. I'm using a circular motion because I don't want to introduce too much direction. I'm going to do that when I go back through with the darker colour pencils, because if I introduce too much directional stroke, I'm going to end up with a really wiry looking bird, and it's not sort of going to mesh together properly. So in areas which will become deeper shadow, I am using more of a circular motion. I don't want to introduce too much line work in there, because you don't have that much definition when you do shadows, you know. When you look at something and it's in dark shadow, it's not clear. And if you add too much detail in there, the highlights are going to start to look lost. It sort of won't work. So you need to think about how these things work together. Highlights are the really important piece you want to capture, I mean, they're the important part, they're what draws everything out. So you need to use your shadows to sort of give them the opportunity to shine. So I'm just going to quickly run over this with some Polychromos Helio Blue Reddish. It's the 151 number pencil, just because I want to get plenty of blue into that otherwise black chest, because when I go over it with the black, it's quite a desaturated tone. It will drown out some of the colour, and I want to keep a lot of that colour in there because he's a fairy red and all his colouring is blue. So even if this was just solid black, he would be getting so much reflection of colour off the other blue feathers that he has. So that's sort of just going over that very lightly. There's not a lot of definition at this point. It's really just sort of tinting the area rather than colouring or making any shape. So now I'm going to go through with the Faber-Castell black because it gives me a nice point and it lets me layer up the black. It lets me really fill in those areas rather than just sort of slapping it on and ending up with one tone and getting a really flat drawing at the end of it. So again, in these areas I'm using sort of a elongated oval stroke really. And if you think about it, that sort of follows the shape of the feathers, which are like that. And my cat's about to jump on my table. Get off! So I'm just filling in the darkest areas first, and at this point I can sort of really look and see if I need to drag any of those feathers out into the chest area. And I can do that here because they're only tiny marks. They're not going to make much of a difference that I don't have the rest of the layering underneath. So you can see that the colour that's coming on is really quite full. There's not that much of the white page showing, or at least there won't be when I finished. It's just something you got to work towards, and it takes a lot of time. You know, colour pencil work is very slow if you do it properly. It's very slow because you have this tiny little point on the end of your pencil, and it's tiny, it's like a needle head. And that's what you're trying to cover the whole page with. You can't, it's not like painting where you can whip out a bigger brush and suddenly cover a large area. It's all slow and it's all layering. You know, sometimes I'll use 15 layers on one piece, and you'll see that with all the different colours that come out. And I'm just going very slowly, working over the same areas, using a really light hand. It's something you really have to train yourself to do. It's not something that comes naturally to us, because when we're writing as kids, we're using pressure to make a mark on a page. So this is that Helio Blue again. Just sort of toning that in, because when I bring out the highlights and things, I want it to be blue. I don't want to lose all that blue because black is such a desaturated colour. I want to keep it really full of colour. And again, there's not a lot of technique when it comes to that. It's sort of just filling the area but going really lightly. So this is the Payne's Grey again, the Luminance pencil, because it's a similar tone, so it's going to allow me just to blend those together and get a smooth finish. And it is a long way from finished yet, so don't get your hopes up. But it's just a process, and you use the same process all the time. If I was doing fur, I would alternate between doing layers. So if I was doing fur, I would alternate between layers that are smooth and blending and bringing all the colours together, and ones that have a lot of lines, very small, delicate lines that sort of bring things and add that line of shape in there. But you don't want to have too many lines, you know. You don't want it to end up looking very coarse and stringy, which is something I am working on overcoming at the moment. I've had a lot of issues overcoming this thought where everything had to be very fine lines, and I've lost my black pencil. There it is. And now I'm sort of learning that it's more important to bring everything together than to use a whole heap of shapes and colours and lines and sort of try and lay them on top of each other and hope they sort of work, because that's what you saw in there, but it doesn't work. You have to work at uniting everything you lay on the paper, and that means using the same colours over and over again and learning how they work with one another. Sort of every different colour has its own personality. There are colours that will take whatever's underneath them and make it brighter, and yet if you laid them down on their own, they might be a totally different colour. So what I'm doing here at the moment is I'm just using the black to sort of introduce the idea that there's a bunch of feathers in there and not just a whole heap of funny looking colours. And you know, I'm just going really lightly again, and there's not a lot of technique in this. It's just sort of scribbling really. But it follows the natural sort of look of what the feathers are like, and it keeps helping to fill those areas in so that you don't get that grainy look that everyone seems to complain about. I mean, it is there if you look at it with a magnifying glass, but it's not a big issue. And my cat is wondering who I'm talking to. So now I'm going to go back and I'm going to bring in a white pencil, and this is another Caran d'Ache pencil, but it's not the Luminance pencil. It is the Museum Aquarelle White. They have an excellent light fast rating, but they're very smooth, very buttery, and they lay over the top of pretty much every colour you lay down, and they give a really nice finish. I've never heard of anyone else using them, but it's my chosen white pencil. I use it on pretty much everything I do. So basically I'm just following the lines that I worked in with the black pencil. I don't want to bring them out too much, but I'm going to go brighter than what's in the reference photo, because I really want to bring out those colours and I really want it to stand out. I don't want to sort of have him get lost with this funny little black chest that doesn't really go anywhere. It's just flat looking. So you're better off introducing more highlights than having anything that's too dark. And you know, again, I'm just going over the top very lightly and introducing the idea of feathers. I'm not drawing feathers, I'm using lines to create ideas that they are there. Very lightly through these black areas, just so I can bring out the blue tones that are in there. And I am going to go through and add a little bit more blue, just because I don't feel it's colourful enough. And looking at my reference, it's quite a royal blue in there. I do want to bring that out. So I'm just going to go over the dark areas and sort of lead into those highlights that I added, just to give that idea. And you know, I'm hardly touching it. And I'll go through with the Payne's Grey and just sort of unify things again, because you could see as I went through that the blue doesn't quite meet up, but it needs to be in there. So I'm going to use this Payne's Grey, the Luminance Payne's Grey, to introduce that blended, smooth flowing look back in there, so there's not any sudden jarring colour changes. Everything has to work, and it's worth taking the time to learn how to make this work and learn how to make it smooth. So this is that Museum Aquarelle white again. And as you get a lot of layers, you can use your finger just to smooth this colour out a bit. And I just sort of brush over the top when it's smooth. There's not really any pressure involved, it's just taking that little bit of colour that may be sitting on top and just getting it to blend in nicely, so you don't have any really coarse edges in there. And there we have it. That is the black breast of this fairy wren. That's how I layer up my colours to get a really smooth and really full finish. And thanks for watching.